The first time the world broke, I blamed sleep deprivation. It was 3:17 a.m. I was on my third consecutive all-nighter, trying to render the fluid dynamics for the Solstice Tower's kinetic facade. My screen was a mess of neon blue stress vectors, and my eyes felt like they were full of hot sand. I stood up to get coffee. My studio apartment is small, the kitchen is only 6 feet from my desk. I pushed back my chair, stood, turned, and reached for the kitchen doorway. Except it wasn't a doorway. It was a wall. A seamless, impossibly smooth wall of what looked like polished obsidian. It was cold. I touched it, my fingers met a surface that felt like glass, but it had a deep, resonant hum to it, a vibration that went straight up my arm and into my teeth. I blinked. Just a single, exhausted blink. And I was in my kitchen. The cheap linoleum was tacky under my socks, the faucet was dripping, and the doorway back to my studio was exactly where it should be. I leaned on the counter, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. I didn't get coffee. I went back to my desk, saved the file, and passed out on my keyboard. My name is Alex Karras. I'm an architectural associate, which is a polite way of saying I'm the guy who does the math that proves the real architect's dream won't collapse and kill 1,000 people. The pressure is immense. The Solstice Tower was my make-or-break project. I'd been working 100-hour weeks for 6 months. So, I forgot the obsidian wall. I filed it under burnout-induced hallucination. Until the sound started. It began 2 days later. It was a low, sub-bass frequency. The kind you feel more than you hear. It was the exact same vibration I'd felt in the wall. I heard it in the quiet of my apartment. I felt it thrumming in the concrete floor of the office parking garage. I started asking people, "Do you hear that?" My colleague, Sarah, just gave me that pitying look. "Hear what, Alex?" "The ventilation." It wasn't the ventilation. This sound felt structural. It felt like the city's bones were groaning. I bought a carbon monoxide detector. The reading was 0. I went to a walk-in clinic. The doctor told me I had auditory tinnitus brought on by extreme stress and prescribed me Xanax, which I didn't take. The sound was worst at night. It would sync with my pulse until I couldn't tell the difference between the hum and my own blood. Then came the second break. I was in the office elevator, heading down to the lobby. It was packed, the usual 5 p.m. rush. I was crammed in the back corner, staring at the brushed steel doors. The elevator shuddered to a stop at the lobby. The doors opened. It wasn't the lobby. It was a forest. Not a nice, sun-dappled forest. It was a place of grotesque, pale trees, like fungal growths that had mimicked the shape of oaks. The air was thick with white spores that drifted like snow, and the ground was a mat of dark, slimy moss. The smell hit me first, an overwhelming stench of ammonia and wet rot. Nobody else reacted. The people in front of me just stepped out. One by one, they walked out of the elevator and into the fungal woods. A woman in a red coat, my boss Mr. Henderson, a guy from accounting, they just filed out, their faces blank, and disappeared behind the pale, slick trunks. I stood frozen, my briefcase handle digging into my palm. The hum was deafening here, a physical weight in the air. From the woods, something moved. It was just a flicker of motion, something that detached itself from a tree trunk. It was tall, impossibly thin, and its skin was the color of old, water-damaged drywall. It didn't have a face, just a smooth, convex plate of bone that reflected the sickly light. It turned its head toward the elevator. Toward me. The elevator door alarm shrieked, that piercing beep for being held open too long. I slammed my hand against the "door close" button, mashing it over and over. The doors started to slide shut. The creature, the tenant, my mind whispered, took one, impossibly fast, joint-snapping step toward me. The doors closed. I fell back against the elevator wall, hyperventilating. The steel box vibrated, then ascended. Ascended. When the doors opened again, I was on the 14th floor. Data entry. A woman I didn't know looked at me, annoyed. "Are you getting off, or?" I stumbled out. I ran to the emergency stairwell, my heart trying to escape my chest. I scrambled down 14 flights of stairs, burst into the real lobby, bright, marble, full of sunshine, and didn't stop running until I was on the street. I called in sick for 3 days. I locked myself in my apartment. I tried to convince myself I was having a psychotic break. The stress, the hours, it had finally cracked my brain. On the third night, I couldn't sleep. The hum was so loud I had to put in earplugs. I sat at my desk, trying to sketch something normal, something grounding. I just let my hand move. After an hour, I looked down at what I'd drawn. It was the elevator. And the fungal forest. I had drawn it all from memory, the pale trees, the slimy moss, the drifting spores. And in the corner of the page, half hidden by a tree, I had drawn the tenant. I'd drawn its smooth, bounce face. And this time, in my own sketch, it was looking directly at me. A new detail was there, one I hadn't consciously registered. In the sketch, the creature was holding something. It was small, rectangular, and made of plastic. It was an office ID badge. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I looked closer at my own frantic pencil lines. I had drawn the name on the badge. It said, Henderson. My boss. The man who had walked into the woods. A notification pinged on my laptop. It was a new email from HR, sent at 2 a.m. The subject line was, regarding the unexpected departure of Mr. Henderson. I stared at the screen, then at my drawing. The hum in my apartment stopped. Silence. A thick, absolute, terrifying silence. Then, from the hallway outside my apartment door, I heard a sound. A single, wet, dragging footstep. My heart stopped. The apartment was on the 12th floor. The hallway was carpeted. You don't make a wet, dragging sound on cheap industrial carpet. Silence. The thrumming sub-bass of the hum was completely gone. I was in an acoustic vacuum, and the only sound was the high-pitched whine in my own ears and the frantic clicking of my laptop's hard drive. Another sound. A schloop. It was the sound of something thick and adhesive being pressed against the wood of my door, right over the peephole. I didn't breathe. I was paralyzed, standing between my desk and my kitchen. The HR email glowed on the monitor, the words, unexpected departure, burning into my retinas. Henderson was gone. The thing from the forest was here. My tactical analyst brain, the part of me that calculates load-bearing stress, was screaming. Information. Get information. I crept toward the door. Every floorboard creak was a gunshot. I put my hand on the wall, and it was cold. Colder than normal. I reached the door. My eye drifted to the peephole. It was dark. Blocked. I leaned in, my ear almost touching the wood. I could hear something on the other side. A low, moist clicking, like a million wet pebbles being rolled around in a bag. And breathing. A deep, slow, watery respiration, like air being forced through a sodden sponge. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. As I moved, my foot knocked over my metal trash can. It hit the floor with a hollow clang. The sound on the other side of the door stopped. The breathing, the clicking, everything. I waited, my pulse a frantic drum solo. 1 second. 10. 30. Then, from the hallway, I heard the drag, slurp, noise again, moving away. It grew fainter, retreating toward the elevators, until it was gone. The hum snapped back on. Thwum. It was so sudden and so loud that I cried out. It felt like the air pressure in the room had dropped. I gasped, leaning against the wall. I was alive. It was gone. I looked at the door. At the base, where the draft stopper should be, there was a dark, greasy smear. A puddle of viscous, black fluid, like septic tank runoff, was seeping under the door and onto my floor. And it was moving. The puddle wasn't just a puddle, it was a living colony of something. It was teeming with the same white spores from the elevator forest, but here they were crawling, clumping, forming tiny, temporary structures. They were building something. I watched, horrified, as the black liquid began to climb. It defied gravity, crawling up the flat, white paint of my door, staining it. It moved like a time-lapse video of a slime mold, extending greasy pseudopods. It was heading for the deadbolt. No, I whispered. I grabbed a roll of paper towels and threw it at the door. The paper hit the mass and was instantly absorbed, turning a soggy, disintegrating black. The apartment glitched. It wasn't a hallucination this time. It was a physical tear. The light from my lamp didn't just flicker, it bent. The corner of my room, where the two walls met the ceiling, suddenly seemed to unfold, the right-angle geometry becoming impossibly acute, like the inside of a closing spike. The walls themselves became translucent. For one agonizing second, I saw what was behind them. It wasn't drywall and 2x4s. It was a solid, pulsating mass of pale, fungal matter, latticed with thick, black veins that throbbed in time with the hum. The tenant wasn't just in the building. The building was becoming the tenant. The glitch snapped back. The room was just a room. The walls were just walls. But the smell of ammonia and rot was overpowering. And the black ooze on my door was gone. Vanished. The door was clean, save for a single, damp, white spore clinging to the brass of the deadbolt. I ran to my computer. I had to get out. I had to call someone. The police? A priest? My laptop screen was different. The HR email was gone. My architecture software, the program I used to design the Solstice Tower, was open. The 3D model of the tower dominated the screen. It was my design, my masterpiece. But the file had been altered. I looked at the modification log. Last saved, 3:17 a.m. The exact moment of my first vision. The moment the obsidian wall had appeared. I hadn't saved it. I had been asleep. I navigated the 3D space, my hands shaking on the mouse. The facade was right. The atrium was right. But the foundation, the deep, structural core of the building that I had spent months calculating, it was wrong. Someone, or something, had been in my files. It had edited the core. Buried deep in the geometry, hidden beneath layers of structural code, was a new shape. It wasn't part of the design. It was a complex, non-Euclidean formula that had been embedded into the building's literal footprint. A series of angles and vectors that made no logical sense, yet my own software had accepted them. It wasn't a structural element. It was a sigil. A pattern. My sketch. The one I had made of the tenant. I turned to my desk to find it. It was gone. My pencils were there. My notepad was there. But the drawing itself had vanished. My phone, lying next to the laptop, buzzed. A new text. From Sarah. My colleague. The one who had told me I was just hearing the ventilation. I opened it. It was a picture. It was a selfie, taken in near darkness. It was Sarah. She was in the fungal forest. Her skin was pale and luminous, her eyes wide and black, her smile stretched into a mask of pure, ecstatic joy. Behind her, just over her shoulder, a smooth, bone-white faceplate reflected the camera's flash. A new text bubble appeared beneath the photo. Alex, you were right. Another. It's not the ventilation. Another. The phone slipped from my grasp, hitting the desk with a dull thud. The screen, still displaying Sarah's grotesque selfie, winked out. Her words echoed in the sudden silence of the apartment, competing with the returning, oppressive hum. It's the architecture. My design. My tower. The one I had been slaving over for months. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a trap. A beacon. A monstrous instrument. I scrambled away from the desk, my mind a whirlpool of fear and fragmented logic. The glitches, the obsidian wall, the forest elevator, the tenant, the black ooze, Henderson's disappearance, Sarah's message, it all coalesced into a terrifying, singular truth. This wasn't happening to the city. It was happening from the Solstice Tower. I had to get to the tower. Not to warn anyone, who would believe me? But to understand. To see what I had unknowingly built. I fumbled for my keys, my hands trembling so badly I dropped them twice. My apartment door, previously covered in black slime, now looked innocent and sterile. I yanked it open, scanning the empty, silent hallway. The hum was fainter out here, replaced by the distant, familiar drone of city traffic. A false sense of normalcy. The elevator was at the end of the hall. I stared at its polished metal doors, memories of the fungal forest flashing through my mind. I couldn't. I just couldn't. I ran for the stairwell. 12 flights down. My legs burned, my lungs ached, but the fear spurred me on. Each descending step felt like I was escaping the tightening grip of something invisible, something that had already taken root in my home. I burst out into the lobby, nearly colliding with a bewildered couple entering the building. They looked at me as if I were insane, sweat-soaked, wild-eyed, gasping for breath. I ignored them, pushing past and out onto the street. The city was alive, indifferent. Taxis honked, pedestrians bustled, a hot dog vendor shouted his wares. It was a jarring contrast to the silent horror I had just experienced. But even amidst the noise, I could still feel it, the low, resonant thrum beneath my feet. The hum. It was everywhere. I flagged down a taxi, yelling my office building's address. The driver, a portly man with a perpetually bored expression, just grunted. As we drove, I found myself staring out the window. The city lights blurred into streaks of color. Then, amidst the familiar skyline, I saw it. The Solstice Tower. It was already impossibly tall, a gleaming spire of glass and steel piercing the pre-dawn sky. But as I watched, something shifted in its reflection. The glass seemed to ripple, to bend in an unnatural way, like water disturbed by an unseen force. For a fleeting moment, the geometric lines of the building seemed to melt and then reform, hinting at a far more ancient, organic structure beneath the modern facade. A silhouette of colossal, calcified bone, latticed with pulsating veins, briefly overlaid the sleek architecture. Then it snapped back to normal. The taxi driver caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Everything all right back there, pal?" he asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "Fine," I croaked, my throat dry. "Just admiring the view." He shrugged and turned back to the road. We pulled up to the office building. It was a massive, imposing structure that somehow felt both familiar and alien now. The hum here was almost a physical presence, vibrating through the pavement, up the walls. I paid the driver, ignoring his questioning look, and rushed inside. The lobby was empty, sterile. The security guard, a burly man named Frank, was dozing at his desk. I slipped past him, making a beeline for the employee-only elevators. I couldn't risk the main ones. I swiped my badge, and the service elevator dinged, opening with a hiss. It was smaller, grimier, and didn't have the polished steel of the public ones. No reflective surfaces to show me things I didn't want to see. I selected the highest floor. The car lurched upwards. The ascent was slow, agonizing. Each floor passed with a soft thud. I stared at the numbers above the door, counting them down. When it reached my floor, the elevator doors opened. And for a third time, the world broke. It wasn't my office floor. It wasn't the fungal forest. It was a vast, cavernous space. The air was frigid, biting. Above me, impossibly high, was a ceiling of jagged, interlocking obsidian. Below, a floor of the same material stretched into the darkness. There were no walls, only the endless, echoing expanse. And everywhere, clinging to the dark, crystalline surfaces, were the white spores. They pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent glow, illuminating the space with an otherworldly light. In the center of this titanic chamber, embedded within the very structure of the obsidian floor, was a gigantic, pulsating organ. It was a perfect match to the non-Euclidean sigil I had found in my architectural designs. A vast, intricate mechanism of bone and sinew, constantly shifting, contracting, expanding. It throbbed with the hum, which here was deafening, a roar that vibrated through every cell of my body. This was the core. The Solstice Tower's true foundation. And then I saw them. They were suspended in the air, drifting slowly, silently, amidst the spores. Hundreds of them. Perhaps thousands. Human bodies. They were encased in crystalline cocoons, like flies caught in amber. Their faces were serene, mouths slightly agape. Their eyes were open, but milky and unseeing. Each cocoon pulsed with the same faint light as the spores. I recognized some of them. Mr. Henderson, his bald head gleaming through the crystal. A woman from accounting. People I had seen in the elevator. And Sarah. Her cocoon floated directly in front of me, her smile frozen in that same beatific, horrifying rictus I'd seen in her selfie. Her eyes, milky and dead, seemed to stare right through me. Then, from the depths of the obsidian chamber, from the very center of the pulsating organ, a shadow detached itself. It was the Tenant. Taller here, more defined. Its bone-white faceplate was a perfect mirror, reflecting the spore light. It glided towards Sarah's cocoon, its impossibly thin limbs unfolding. It reached out. A long, slender digit, tipped with a needle-like claw, pressed against the crystal. The cocoon glowed brighter. Sarah's face twitched. A single tear, crystalline and silver, tracked slowly down her cheek. The Tenant turned its featureless face. Slowly, inexorably, it rotated towards me. And I realized something. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a hallucination. This was a door. And I was standing in its frame. The hum intensified, shaking the very air. The elevator doors behind me began to slide shut, trapping me in this impossible space. The Tenant raised its other hand, slowly, deliberately. In its grasp, shimmering with an ethereal light, was a small, familiar object. My ID badge. It wasn't just reflecting the light. It was absorbing it. And as it absorbed, the sigil on the gigantic organ in the floor pulsed brighter, faster. Then, for the first time, I heard a sound from the Tenant itself. Not a voice, not a growl. It was a click. The same clicking I had heard outside my apartment door. And then, it began to sing. It was a low, resonant note, a pure frequency that vibrated through my bones, bypassing my ears entirely. It was the hum. It was the sound of the entire city. And it was coming from the Tenant. The elevator doors closed with a final, echoing thunk. The elevator doors slammed shut with the dull, absolute finality of a bank vault. The thunk echoed in the vast, obsidian chamber, instantly swallowed by the Tenant's deafening, bone-vibrating song. I was trapped. I hammered my fists against the brushed steel doors. No! Open! Open! I frantically mashed the button panel. The buttons were dark. The circuits were dead. The elevator car I had been in was no longer connected to my reality. It was just a cold, metal box, and I was on the wrong side of its door. I spun around. The Tenant stood in the center of the chamber, by the pulsating, fleshy sigil. It still held my ID badge aloft, the plastic catching the pale, sporous light. Its song was not a sound, it was a force. It was the same frequency as the hum, but amplified 1,000 times, a pure, structural resonance that was shaking the chamber, shaking me. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. The obsidian floor beneath my feet vibrated, and I felt the geometry of the room flexing. The song was a tool. It was architecture. As I watched, paralyzed by terror, the song changed. It deepened, shifting from a roar to a complex, multi-layered frequency. And my mind cracked open. It wasn't a voice. It was data. A torrent of information, raw and unfiltered, poured directly into my consciousness. I was submerged in a flow of impossible blueprints. I saw the Solstice Tower not as a building, but as a tuning fork. An antenna designed to pierce the membrane between worlds. I saw their world. A place of cold, precise, dark geometry. A universe of living architecture. I saw the Tenant. It wasn't an invader. It was a surveyor. An architect, like me. It had found the flaw in our reality, a weak point where the two dimensions were thin. And my Solstice Tower, in my arrogant genius, had been designed to be built on that exact weak point. My design hadn't created the breach. It had stabilized it. The song data flooded me with understanding. The glitches, the obsidian wall, the forest, were accidents. Unstable overlaps. The Tenant had been correcting my work. The modified blueprints, the Sigil, it was trying to build a door. A stable, permanent anchor to link the two worlds. And the Cocoons. I looked at Sarah, her face frozen in that ecstatic smile. They weren't food. They were processors. The Tenant was using their captive consciousness, their life force, to render the new reality. They were a biological computer farm, powering the merge. The Tenant lowered its hand. The song softened, becoming almost inquisitive. It held up my ID badge. The data stream in my head focused on a single concept, authority. My ID wasn't just plastic. It was a symbol. It was my signature as the architect. The Tenant had stolen my credentials, using my implicit authority to alter the plans, to build the core. But it was unstable. It needed the original architect. It needed me. Not to fuel the engine, but to design it. It took a single, gliding step toward me. The sound was that same, wet schloop. The song shifted again, becoming an invitation. A promise. Complete the work. Stabilize the anchor. Join us. The implication was horrific. It didn't want to destroy us. It wanted to merge with us. To correct our flawed, chaotic reality with its perfect, orderly design. And I was the key. That broke the paralysis. No, I choked out. Get away from me. I turned back to the elevator doors, my fingers scrabbling for purchase. The maintenance panel. Every elevator has one. I jammed my keys into the tiny lock at the bottom and twisted. The plate popped open. Behind me, the song spiked into a shriek of fury. The gliding schloop sound was faster now, closer. The air grew impossibly cold, the smell of ammonia and rot washing over me. I plunged my hand into the nest of wires. I wasn't an electrician, but I knew structures. I knew emergency systems. I saw it, a thick, red-handled manual release lever. It was designed to uncouple the doors from the motor in case of a fire. I grabbed it. The Tenant was right behind me. I could feel the cold radiating from its bone-white faceplate. I pulled the lever with all my weight. Screech. The doors didn't open. The mechanism was fighting me. The song was a physical weight, pressing the doors shut. But they moved. A 1-inch gap of pure, black void appeared. A thin, gray, needle-like finger scraped across the back of my jacket, snagging the fabric. I roared, planting my feet and throwing my entire body against the lever. The gears ground. The gap widened to 6 inches. Then a foot. I didn't wait. I turned sideways and hurled myself through the opening, into the absolute darkness of the elevator shaft. I fell. I tumbled through a black, cold void, expecting to fall 14 stories to my death. But I only fell for a second. I hit a solid surface, hard. The cheap, static-smelling carpet of the 14th floor landing. I was out. I lay gasping, my heart feeling like it would burst from my chest. I was in the office building. The lights were on. The air was still. The hum was gone. I scrambled to my feet, looking back. The elevator wasn't there. There was no door. It was just a solid wall of drywall, a fire extinguisher mounted on it. As if the service elevator I'd taken had never existed. I was alone. The silence was overwhelming. I checked the time on a wall clock. 3:17 a.m. The exact time of my first hallucination. The world had reset. Was it over? Was I safe? I leaned against the wall, my body shaking in violent spasms. I had to get out, call the police, tell someone. What? My hand went to my pocket to find my phone. My fingers brushed against the familiar rectangle of my ID badge. I froze. Slowly, I pulled it out. It was my badge. The one that had been in my pocket all along. The tenant hadn't been holding my badge. It had been holding a symbol of it. A request. I turned the badge over. It was warm to the touch, almost hot. And it was no longer blank. Burned into the white plastic on the back, as if seared by a high-precision laser, was a new, intricate symbol. It was a perfect, miniature replica of the sigil from the Obsidian floor. It was a mark. A signature of acceptance. My phone buzzed in my other pocket. I fumbled for it, my blood turning to ice. A new text message. From an unknown sender. I opened it. The message contained a single line of text, gleaming white on the black screen. The proposal is accepted. We await your revisions. The phone dropped from my hand, clattering onto the cheap office carpet. The words "we await your revisions" burned in the air. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. Accepted? I never accepted anything. I ran. I fought. I scrambled back from the phone, from the wall where the elevator used to be. The 14th floor hallway was silent, sterile, and bathed in the humming fluorescent light of 3:17 a.m. It was a perfect replica of reality, but it felt thin. Like a stage set. The marked ID badge in my hand was still warm. I threw it. It skittered across the floor, coming to rest by the drinking fountain. It didn't matter. I could still feel it, a phantom warmth in my palm, a tingling that was spreading up my arm. Revisions. I had to get out. I sprinted for the emergency stairwell, the only exit I trusted. I burst through the heavy fire door and began to run down. But something was wrong. It was my perception. The stairs, the angles were off. As an architect, I live by code. Egress path width, tread depth, riser height. These stairs, which I'd used a dozen times, were suddenly, fundamentally incorrect. The rise-to-run ratio was inefficient. The stringer, the load-bearing support, was carrying stress unevenly, a microfracture waiting to happen. I stopped, dizzy, clinging to the handrail. The hum started again. It wasn't the sub-bass, single-note thrum from before. This was the song. The complex, multi-layered symphony of frequencies I'd heard in the Obsidian chamber. But now, it wasn't a deafening assault. It was precise. It was data. It was coming from the wall. I could see it. The concrete block wall of the stairwell was no longer opaque. It was a translucent blueprint. I saw the rebar inside, the aggregate in the concrete, the flow of energy. And I saw the flaw the hum was pointing out. A hairline crack near the 12th floor landing, invisible to the naked eye, but a critical failure point. My head throbbed. An idea, fully formed, bloomed in my mind. Not an idea, a solution. A set of geometric coordinates. A new equation. If the vector is shifted 3.14 degrees, and the material density is increased to match. No, I whispered, shaking my head. Get out of my head. I stumbled down the stairs, trying to ignore the song, trying to unsee the skeletal blueprint of the building around me. The flaw is critical. It will collapse. It must be corrected. The thought wasn't mine. It was calm, objective, and utterly cold. It was the tenant's logic, using my voice. I reached the landing. The crack in the wall seemed to scream at me. The hum spiked, a dissonant chord of wrongness. I couldn't help it. My training, my instincts, my entire career had been about fixing flaws. "Stop it," I whimpered. But my hand was already moving. I reached out and pressed my palm flat against the painted concrete wall, right over the invisible flaw. The moment my skin made contact, the world shifted. The tingling in my arm became a roaring current. The hum resolved into a perfect, harmonious chord. The wall beneath my hand flowed. It wasn't a glitch. It was a render. The concrete lost its gritty texture. It became impossibly smooth, impossibly cold. It darkened, solidifying into the familiar, polished black obsidian. The substance didn't just cover the wall, it became the wall. The geometry of the corner tightened, the angle becoming mathematically perfect. The flaw vanished, corrected by a new, alien, and undeniably stronger architecture. I snatched my hand back as if burned. The obsidian patch was the size of my handprint, a perfect, dark stain of otherness on the mundane wall. It was cold, stable, and silent. The dissonant part of the song was gone. I had just performed my first revision. Horror choked me. I didn't run down the rest of the stairs. I fell, tumbling and sliding until I crashed through the lobby-level door. The lobby was empty. Frank, the security guard, was exactly where I'd last seen him, asleep at his desk, his head on his chest. The scene was identical. But I wasn't. I looked at the lobby, and I couldn't see it anymore. I saw a mess. The marble floor tiles were a chaotic, inefficient pattern. The structural columns supporting the atrium were over-engineered, wasting mass. The grand, sweeping glass entrance was an acoustic nightmare, a membrane of weakness. The hum was everywhere, a constant, instructive murmur in my head. Flawed. Inefficient. Correct it. Revise. Leave me alone. I screamed into the empty lobby. Frank, the guard, didn't stir. He was part of the set. He wasn't real. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but the tingling was stronger, a feeling of power. A new text pinged on my phone, still clutched in my fist. I didn't need to read it. I knew what it said. I ran for the glass doors, bursting out onto the street. The pre-dawn air was cold, but it didn't stop the song. The city, oh God, the city. It was a nightmare of flawed design. A skyline of screaming, chaotic, unstable structures. Every building, every bridge, every street lamp was a mathematical offense. The entire city was a mistake. The hum rose in my head, a symphony of errors, a desperate plea for order. I looked up at the Solstice Tower, my tower, piercing the dark sky. It alone was quiet. It was the tuning fork. The anchor. The source. And it was waiting. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked. A new message. Revision at 12th floor stairwell, accepted. A second message appeared immediately after. Phase 1, stabilize this node. Begin. The phone screen glowed in the pre-dawn light, its message an indictment. Begin. No, I whispered, but the word had no power. The hum was a torrent in my skull. The city wasn't just flawed, it was a deafening, agonizing shriek of errors. The leaning streetlight across the road, the hairline cracks in the pavement, the uneven spacing of the windows on the building opposite, each imperfection was a spike of pain behind my eyes. I clutched my head, stumbling back. The city was a wound, and the hum was the nerve-ending, screaming. I tried to run. I sprinted down the street, away from the office building, away from the Solstice Tower. But it was a trap. The further I moved from the node, the more chaotic the environment became, and the louder the dissonance grew. The song became a cacophony. I saw the rebar in a concrete barrier, rusted and weak. I saw the misaligned pipes beneath a manhole cover. I saw the unstable foundation of a corner store. Flaw. Failure. Chaos. Correct it. Correct it. I made it 2 blocks before I collapsed. The sensory overload was unbearable. It was a migraine of cosmic proportions, a physical weight pressing me into the sidewalk. I was vomiting, dry heaving from the sheer wrongness of the world. There was only one way to make it stop. The node. My office building. It was the only place I had already begun the correction. It was the only source of relief. Crawling, then stumbling, then running, I made my way back. I burst through the glass doors of the lobby, my body shaking, desperate for the pain to end. The lobby was as I'd left it. Chaotic, inefficient, loud. Frank, the security guard, was still asleep at his desk, his gentle snoring a particularly jarring, biological imperfection in the song. Phase 1, stabilize this node. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't in control. I was an instrument. A tool. I walked to the center of the lobby, to the main structural column that rose 3 stories to the atrium. It was clad in beige, veined marble. A lie. I could see the steel I-beam within, could see the microscopic, imperfect welds, the uneven stress distribution. I placed my hands on it. The relief was instant. It was a flood of cold, pure code. The dissonant shriek in my head resolved into a perfect, powerful chord. The song and I were one. I didn't just touch the column. I revised it. The marble didn't shatter, it flowed. Like ink in water, the black, living obsidian bled from my fingertips. It consumed the beige stone, racing up the column in a silent, geometric wave. It wasn't just a covering, it was a replacement. The flawed steel inside dissolved, reformed by the new, perfect architecture. The very geometry of the atrium snapped into alignment. The acoustics changed. The air grew cold and still. The transformation didn't stop. It flowed from the central column, across the ceiling beams, down the walls. The chaotic patterns of the floor tiles were consumed, replaced by a seamless, reflective black floor. The grand glass entryway froze, darkening until it was as opaque and impenetrable as the wall I'd first seen in my apartment. I stood in the center of the transformed space, breathing in the cold, clean air. The pain was gone. There was only peace. Order. The black tide flowed toward the security desk. Toward Frank. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just watched. The obsidian architecture, intelligent and precise, flowed over the cheap wood of the desk, over the monitor, over the half-eaten donut. Frank didn't wake up. The substance covered his boot, his leg, his torso. He didn't struggle. His face, slack in sleep, was covered last. He wasn't encased. He was integrated. His form was absorbed into the structure, becoming a part of the new, solid wall. A silent, perfect, still sleeping bas-relief, his features smoothed into the cold obsidian. He was no longer a biological flaw. He was architecture. He was stable. The lobby was complete. It was vast, silent, and perfect. A perfect echo of the Tenant's world. I lowered my hands. The tingling was gone, replaced by a cold, steady thrum of power. I had corrected the node. I had stabilized the anchor. My phone, resting on the now obsidian floor, lit up. The bright white text was the only source of light in the dark, reflective chamber. Node stabilized. Proceed to phase 2. A new message followed immediately. It wasn't text. It was a file download. Subway_blueprints_v.7.4.zip. The file unpacked itself. A map of the city's sprawling underground transit system filled my screen. It was a tangled mess of inefficient lines, flawed tunnels, and chaotic schedules. A single station was highlighted, blinking in a calm, insistent red. 7th and Holland. F-line. Structural weakness detected. A new directive appeared. The anchor is stable. Expand the perimeter. I stood in the perfected lobby. The silence was absolute, a cold, crystalline peace. The air was clean, free of the biological noise of dust, of breathing, of decay. I walked to the wall where Frank had been. I pressed my palm against it. The obsidian was smooth, solid, and held a faint, resonant vibration. It was the correct frequency. Frank was no longer a flawed, dying organism. He was permanent. He was stable. The song in my head offered a single, pure chord of approval. My phone lit up. Phase 2. Proceed. The directive was clear. I had to leave. I turned to the massive, sealed entryway. As I approached, the black wall flowed apart, the obsidian retracting like a high-speed iris, opening a perfect circle onto the street outside. The moment I stepped through, the pain returned. It was a physical assault. The city screamed. The damp morning air was a soup of chaotic particles, pollen, exhaust, bacteria. The uneven rumble of a distant garbage truck was a jagged blade in my ears. The flawed, asymmetrical clouds, the inefficient scatter of streetlights, the stench of living things, it was an avalanche of sensory failure. The hum was no longer a song. It was a command. A desperate, agonizing need to fix the world. 7th and Holland. The directive on my phone was my only anchor. The pain would stop if I corrected the flaw. I started walking. I could no longer see the city. I only saw its hideous, broken skeleton. I saw the rusted rebar in the overpass above me, the misaligned plumbing beneath the sidewalk, the fractured data in the traffic signals. I couldn't not revise. My hand brushed a rusted mailbox. It flashed to black obsidian, its flawed red paint and pockmarked metal replaced by a perfect, smooth surface. The dissonant rattle of the post vanished from the song. I stepped over a crack in the pavement. My foot landed, and the concrete flowed around my shoe. A patch of black, like spilled ink, spread out, sealing the fissure, stabilizing the ground. The patch grew, correcting the entire sidewalk square. I was leaving a trail. A breadcrumb path of perfection in a wilderness of chaos. I was an infection. And the release that came with each small correction, was addictive. It was the only thing that kept the pain at bay. I reached the subway entrance at 7th and Holland. It was a gaping wound in the earth, a concrete maw breathing a foul air of waste and biological heat. The blueprints on my phone overlaid my vision, a vivid 3D wireframe. The flaw was deep, a critical stress fracture in a load-bearing arch, right over the F-line tracks. But the station was full of other flaws. The early commuters. A scattering of them, huddling on benches, sipping from paper cups. Their bodies were fragile, asymmetrical. Their breathing was ragged. Their movements were chaotic, inefficient, wrong. They were nodes of biological static, polluting the song. I descended the stairs, each step a new wave of sensory nausea. The tilework was chipped. The fluorescent lights flickered at an incorrect frequency. A train wailed in the distance, a deeply offensive sound. I reached the platform. The air was thick. The noise of the crowd, the rumble of the tracks, the smell of them, it was unbearable. A man, his face a mask of stress and sleep deprivation, bumped my shoulder. "Hey, watch it," he grunted. His voice was a shard of glass. His biology was a screaming error. I ignored him. I walked to the edge of the platform. The blueprints on my phone glowed. The flawed arch was just below, visible in the greasy, dark tunnel. A new rumble. Louder. A headlight appeared, a single, imperfect yellow eye in the darkness. The F-line train. I didn't need to climb down. The power, the authority, was in me now. The directive was absolute. Stabilize. Expand. I raised my hand, palm facing the tunnel. The song roared out of me, no longer a whisper in my head, but a physical force that bellowed into the station. The air pressure dropped. The correction began. It wasn't a patch. It was a flood. The black obsidian erupted from the tunnel walls, a silent, liquid tsunami. It didn't just cover the flawed arch, it became it. The walls, the ceiling, the very tracks themselves dissolved and reformed, flowing into a perfect, seamless, black tube. The train was still coming. The driver laid on the horn, a useless, chaotic shriek. He had seen the tunnel solidify. On the platform, the people finally noticed. They turned. They screamed. Their panic was just more static, more error. The black tide surged up from the tracks, flowing over the platform edge like a silent wave. It consumed the yellow warning paint, the concrete, the steel support columns. The train, traveling at 40 miles an hour, slammed into the advancing, solid wall of new architecture. There was no crash. No explosion. Just a deep, resonant thud. The sound of absorption. The train did not crumple, it integrated. The metal fused, flattened, becoming a long, metallic bas-relief in the obsidian wall, its forward momentum instantly and perfectly nullified. The screaming on the platform stopped. The obsidian tide washed over them. The man who had bumped me, the woman with the paper cup, the huddled, sleeping forms on the benches, they were corrected. They didn't fall. They were fused, frozen in their last, flawed moment, becoming part of the new, silent, perfect gallery. The station was silent. Stable. My phone lit up the new, dark chamber. Node 7H stabilized. Proceed. A new map appeared on the screen. The red, blinking dot of the station was gone. In its place, the F-line was now a solid, black vein carved through the city's blueprint. And from that vein, new, smaller lines were already beginning to branch out. The obsidian iris of the 7th and Holland station sealed shut behind me, entombing the perfect, silent chamber. I stepped back out into the noise. It was worse. Far worse. Having just been submerged in the cold, pure, logical peace of the corrected node, the city was an active, agonizing assault. The sun was beginning to rise, a chaotic, searing yellow flaw in the sky, casting ugly, asymmetrical shadows. I looked at my phone. The map was alive. The black vein of the F-line was pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm. And as I watched, new, thinner lines spiderwebbed out from it in real time. They were following the city's bones, the power grid, the sewer lines, the fiber optic cables. The correction was spreading, autonomously. My work at the station had been a key turning a massive engine. The hum was no longer just a song in my head. It was a symphony. And I was the conductor. I could feel the network expanding. I could feel the flaws in a water main 3 blocks away, a vibration of wrongness that I could correct, right here, right now, just by thinking about it. I focused on the sensation. The distant, leaking pipe. The waste. The inefficiency. I pictured the geometry correcting. The water freezing, no, stabilizing. 3 blocks away, I heard a chorus of muffled, biological screams as sinks and faucets all over a building suddenly went silent. The dissonance in the hum lessened. A new black line appeared on my map. The relief was profound. The power was intoxicating. I began to walk toward the next major node. The directive on my phone was clear: central data node. The city's digital heart. The streets were becoming more active, but it was a strange, muted panic. The city was glitching. Traffic lights were out, replaced by smooth, black obsidian obelisks at the intersections. They pulsed with a soft, white light directing traffic with a perfect, inhuman rhythm. Cars were stopping, starting, turning in flawless, efficient patterns. There were no horns. No road rage. Just order. Parts of the city were silent. The areas where the black lines on my map had spread. No electricity. No water. No life. From those areas, a new sound was emerging, a low, resonant, harmonious thrum. The song was taking root. I was walking, but I was also elsewhere. My mind was in the network. I was calculating flow dynamics in the sewer system. I was optimizing the power grid, rerouting energy, sealing the flaws. I was becoming the city's new operating system. Then, a new sound. A different kind of error. It was a sharp, static buzz, like a fly caught in a speaker. It cut against the hum, a jagged, disruptive frequency. It made my teeth ache. I stopped. The sound was coming from an alleyway. I turned, my head throbbing from the new, uninvited dissonance. The hum focused, a spike of anger and inquiry. What is this, chaos? A woman was hiding behind a dumpster. She was flickering. She wasn't just shivering. She was literally glitching, her form phasing in and out of reality, like a bad holographic projection. Her clothes, her face, her very atoms seemed to derez and rerez a dozen times a second. She was an impossibility. A living error the system couldn't parse. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a terror that was somehow louder than the city's chaos. It sees you, she rasped, and her voice was a chorus of static and echoes, as if 3 different versions of her were speaking at once. It sees you, architect. But you're not the only one. The hum in my head went silent. A cold, absolute void. A listening, waiting. What are you? I asked. My own voice sounded strange, too deep, too resonant. I'm a survivor, she glitched, her hand passing through the dumpster she was leaning on. From Node 47. From Denver. It did this to us. It corrected us. Denver. The data stream in my head provided a file. A city deleted. Stabilized. Perfected. A failed merge that had been archived. It's not merging, Alex, she sobbed, her form distorting violently. It's overwriting. It's erasing everything that isn't it. This piece you feel. It's the piece of a formatted hard drive. She pointed a trembling, transparent finger at my right hand. The one I had used to revise the column, the station. I looked down. My hand was no longer flesh. The skin was gone, replaced by a smooth, seamless, semi-translucent black. It was the color of smoked obsidian. I could see the bones beneath, but they were no longer calcium. They were a pale, crystalline lattice, connected by thrumming, dark veins. I tried to make a fist. The hand moved. It was perfectly silent, perfectly efficient. My joints didn't crack. My skin didn't stretch. It just reconfigured. It's not a tool, Alex, the woman whispered, her form fading. It's replacement. You're not fixing the building. You are the building. The hum snapped back, a tidal wave of fury. Unstable element. Chaos. Correct it. No, I whispered, staring at my new, monstrous hand. It's coming for me, the woman shrieked, as the static around her intensified. It hates errors it can't fix. You have to break the song, Alex. Fight the code. Introduce a. She never finished. The pavement at her feet didn't flow. It shattered. A spike of black obsidian, as sharp as a needle, erupted from the concrete. It moved faster than my eye could follow. It impaled her. She didn't scream. Her glitching form just froze for one agonizing second. The static, the echoes, the errors, they were all instantly silenced. Then, the obsidian absorbed her. She dissolved into the spike, like water into a sponge, her form flowing down into the ground, vanishing. The spike retracted, leaving a perfect, black circle on the pavement. The dissonant static was gone. The alley was stable. The hum in my head resolved into a deep, powerful chord of satisfaction. My phone buzzed. Unstable element removed. Proceed to central data node. I stared at the black circle, then at my black hand. The piece of the song washed over me, trying to soothe the spike of horror. It felt so good. It felt so right. But for the first time since this began, a part of my mind, a small, terrified, human part, screamed. And it fought back. The silence in the alley was profound. The hum's chord of satisfaction was a drug, a warm, numbing agent that tried to smooth over the jagged edges of what I had just witnessed. Unstable element removed. The system is cleaner. I stared at my hand. My left hand was still flesh, pale and trembling. I held it up next to my right hand, the obsidian construct. The contrast was horrifying. One was weak, its skin porous, its structure inefficient, its movements governed by flawed, biological twitches. The other was perfect. Strong. Silent. I could feel the thrum of the entire expanding network through those crystalline bones, a direct, physical connection to the F-line tunnel, to the lobby, to the thousand small corrections spreading through the city's arteries. The survivor's words echoed, "You are the building." The hum pulsed, a gentle, corrective wave. We are the building. We are the correction. This is peace. The horror I should have felt was distant, a faint, muffled cry from a part of my mind that was being walled off. The song was actively filtering my own humanity, labeling fear and revulsion as biological static, as errors to be corrected. But the woman had done something the Tenant hadn't anticipated. She had planted a virus. A single, impossible idea. Introduce a flaw. How? How do you create wrongness when every fiber of your being, every command from the hum, is screaming for perfection? It was like trying to design a structure that was meant to collapse. It was anathema. Proceed. The directive on my phone was insistent. The central data node. My obsidian hand clenched. The movement was flawless, silent. My human hand trembled, my nails digging into my palm, drawing blood. The pain was a sudden, sharp dissonance in the song. A new error. The hum spiked, focusing on the pain. Correct. Heal. Stabilize. I watched, fascinated and repulsed, as the black, intelligent material of my other hand seemed to sense the wound. A thin, black filament, like a living wire, detached from my obsidian pinky, snaked across my chest, and touched the bleeding palm of my human hand. The skin flowed. The wound sealed. The pain vanished, replaced by the cold, smooth piece of obsidian. The black mark stayed, a new, dark vein on my human hand. The correction was spreading. I hadn't even willed it. It was autonomous. I had to move. I ran out of the alley. The city was transforming at an exponential rate. The sun was higher, but the light was dimmer, filtered through a sky that was slowly being occluded by a high-altitude, geometric, something. A vast, black web was being woven across the sky, like the structure of a new, global roof. The streets were no longer just patched. Entire blocks were done. Converted. Silent, black, and efficient. The cars were gone, either integrated into the walls or moving on newly formed obsidian tracks, gliding silently, no drivers, all part of the network. I was in a living blueprint. And I was the lead draftsman. Then, ahead of me, in a wide, concrete plaza, I saw it. The opposite of the hum. Chaos. A small group of people, maybe a dozen, were huddled around a burning pile of debris. They were armed with sledgehammers and crowbars. They weren't fighting the architecture, they were fighting the concept of order. They were smashing data terminals, spray painting chaotic, meaningless graffiti on the walls, and shouting. Their voices were a raw, agonizing shriek of static in the song. They were trying to create flaws. The hum in my head roared. It was no longer a song. It was a command of absolute, galactic-scale fury. Errors detected. Critical failure. Correct. 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 The directive was not a suggestion. It was an imperative that seized my muscles. I marched into the plaza. They saw me. A woman screamed and pointed. Not at my face. At my hand. It's one of them. It's a construct, a man yelled, raising his sledgehammer. They were afraid. Their fear was a messy, inefficient, unstable variable. It needed to be filed. Stabilize them, Alex. End their pain. Give them peace. Integrate them. The hum was a soothing, reasonable voice. It was an act of mercy. My right hand, my perfect hand, rose. The power swelled in me, a tidal wave of pure, cold logic. I was going to correct them all. I was going to turn this chaotic, screaming plaza into a silent, beautiful, obsidian gallery. The man with the sledgehammer ran at me, screaming. I focused the energy. I prepared to revise him. But the glitch woman's words echoed. Fight the code. Introduce a flaw. I was an architect. I knew the code. I knew the math. And I knew that the slightest miscalculation, a single, misplaced decimal point, could bring the entire structure down. The man swung the hammer. I unleashed the energy. But as I did, I pushed. I used the fading, human, chaotic part of my mind to flaw the equation. I didn't divide by 2. I divided by 2.1. I didn't aim for a perfect 90-degree angle. I aimed for 89.7. I introduced error. The black energy erupted from my hand. But it wasn't the clean, flowing, liquid revision from before. It was a scream of physical geometry. It shattered. It exploded. It didn't flow, it impaled. A jagged, asymmetrical, hideous spike of black crystal, all sharp, inefficient angles and fractured, ugly surfaces, erupted from the ground. It missed the man, burying itself deep in the plaza's central fountain, which cracked apart with a biological, chaotic shatter. The man fell, scrambling back in terror. But the sound was the real change. The hum in my head didn't offer a chord of satisfaction. It shrieked. It was a high-pitched, agonizing, digital wail, like a billion processors dividing by 0. It was the sound of a system that had just encountered a paradox. The architect had created a flaw. The pain in my head was unbearable. It wasn't the pain of chaos, it was the pain of feedback. The system was rejecting my command. The network itself was attacking me, its own conductor. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my head, as the very song I had been wielding turned on me, trying to erase the impossible error I had just committed. And from the center of the plaza, the ugly, flawed, my spike, began to radiate a new frequency. A jagged, dissonant pulse that was pushing back against the hum. The shriek in my head was a solid wall of white-hot noise. It was the sound of a god discovering blasphemy. The hum, the song, the code, the law, was built on a single, absolute premise: perfection is the only state of existence. I had just created an imperfect existence. Paradox. Paradox. Corrupted architect. Recalibrate. Recalibrate. The directive was no longer external. It was a hostile takeover. The network I had been conducting was now trying to debug me. My obsidian hand, my perfect hand, snapped open. Its fingers, moving with an alien, independent will, reached for my temple. It was going to correct my brain. It was going to format the human error. No, I gasped, the pain from the feedback loop pinning me to the ground. The resistance fighters in the plaza were frozen, watching in terror as I writhed. The man with the sledgehammer had his weapon raised, but he didn't strike. He was watching the spike. My flawed, ugly creation was vibrating. It was radiating a jagged, dissonant anti-song. And where its frequency touched the perfect obsidian of the plaza, the black surfaces glitched. They flickered, revealing the cracked concrete and graffiti beneath. The smooth, flowing lines of the corrected walls developed fractures. The virus was working. My flaw was contagious. More. I choked out, fighting the grip of my own hand as it clawed at my head. I need more. I had to become the flaw. With my last ounce of human strength, I took my trembling, bleeding, human hand and shoved it against the obsidian construct of my right arm. It was like shoving a live wire into a running computer. The biological chaos of my blood, my pain, my fear, hit the perfect, logical system of the Tenant. The feedback loop became a catastrophic explosion. The shriek in my head shattered. The world went white. I felt a snap as the hostile intelligence was forcibly ejected from my mind. The connection was severed. And the pain was gone. I was left kneeling in a silent plaza, gasping. The hum was gone. The song was gone. I was alone in my own head for the first time in days. I looked at my right hand. It was no longer a thrumming, living part of a network. It was just a thing. A cold, dead, black crystal prosthetic, fused to my arm. The power was gone. The battle was over. But the war wasn't. The silence lasted for 3 seconds. Then, a new sound began. A low, deep groan. It wasn't the hum. It was the sound of a city breaking. The network was now driverless. Without the architect, me, to guide it, and with my paradox virus now replicating through its system, the entire black structure was failing. The obsidian spike in the fountain crumbled, dissolving into a pile of black, inert dust. The perfected walls around the plaza began to crack and groan. The black, geometric web in the sky, the new roof of the world, tore. It began to fall. Huge, continent-sized shards of silent, black crystal, miles high, began to detach and plummet toward the city. The resistance fighters screamed, a pure, biological sound of terror. It's all coming down. But they weren't falling fast. They were drifting, slow and graceful, like vast, dark snowflakes. The physics of the Tenant's world were failing. My mind, now blessedly clear and sharp, raced. My architect's brain, the human part, took over. The tower, I said, my voice a raw croak. The resistance leader stared at me. What? The Solstice Tower. It's the anchor. It's the power source. The network is crashing, but the anchor is still linking the worlds. If it falls, it'll tear the city in half. I didn't know if it was true, but it was the only piece of logic I had left. You did this, the woman screamed, pointing at my dead, black hand. Yes, I said, pushing myself to my feet. And I'm the only one who can undo it. I looked at the city. It was a dying dream. A patchwork of familiar, flawed concrete and silent, cracking obsidian. The air was thick with the black, falling dust of the shattered sky web. The hum was gone. But the tenant was still there. The door was still open. The forest was still just one bad elevator ride away. I started to run toward the Solstice Tower, the monument to my own arrogance, the tuning fork that had damned us all. The resistance fighters, seeing no other option, followed me, their sledgehammers now looking like pathetic, primitive toys against the backdrop of a collapsing, alien geometry. I was no longer the tenant's architect. I was humanity's demolitionist. I looked at my obsidian hand. It was dead, yes, but it was still a key. It was a piece of their world. And I was going to use it to slam the door shut. As I ran, a single, black snowflake, a piece of the falling sky, drifted down. It landed on the knuckle of my crystalline hand. It wasn't a snowflake. It was a single, white, familiar spore. It pulsed, once, with a faint, cold, and impossibly patient light. The system hadn't just crashed. It was rebooting.